Thank you. Grab a seat. How good to be together, like after all these months of being unable to meet. And as Steve said earlier, if this is your first time here, just welcome. Really great to have you here. Scott, I think you're a champion, mate. The walls haven't fallen in yet. It's incredible. So just really great to have you here. And Sammy and little Seth, he's out and the kids. So just really fantastic to have you and all of us together this morning. I don't know if when you were walking and you saw that big green machine out there with the front of it off. And it's an incredible piece of machinery because inside of that is a whole lot of highly technical, expensive gear. But that green thing normally needs a motor. At the moment, it has no motor. And I love the way that our team works where if it has no motor because we've got to rebuild the whole thing, that's okay. We'll just put it on a tow truck and bring it in here and whack it in here this morning. And we're doing that so that those that are watching this live or re-watching it during the weeks or whatever, you are valuable to us and you're important to us. And that's why we're doing that. So just so you know, in the life of Redgum, we don't take up an offering. We don't do money talks. We have the most amazing, generous people here. We could not do what we're doing technically if it wasn't for the financial support of people. And we spend most of our time thanking people for giving, not asking people to give. So just so you know, there's an ammo box at the back. If you want to chuck stuff in that, people give online. But it's the generosity of people that has enabled us to do what we've done for the last 10 months and keep building upon that. I just want to pray. God, I thank you for every single person that's in this room. I thank you for those that will watch this in some form, that you are not limited to what takes place in time and space. And I thank you for technology, but most of all, I thank you for people. And I thank you for the connectedness that you bring us all together with, that we are to do community, that we need each other. And I thank you for that. Over the last few weeks, we've been doing a series on emotional health and relational health. Why? Why would we do that? Well, I'm telling you, I'm done with really good people, Christians that have been in churches for years, living broken and dysfunctional in some area of their life. I'm just done with it. And so whatever it takes for us to move forward, I'm going to commit the rest of my life's energy to seeing people free, to be able to live how God intended, whether that's physically, emotionally, spiritually, relationally. Like, we're so vulnerable when it comes to the relationships in our lives. And so that's just why we're doing this. It's our commitment. And I think during this process, I've somehow assumed that people would know what emotional health looks like, but I've never given it a definition. And so, big drum roll, here's the definition, right? All these weeks into it. And I think it starts with being able to identify and understand our own emotions, which sounds really simple. But someone I know in my world, he would have described himself as a very emotionally stable person because he rarely cried. He tended to be not highly expressive in how he expressed things, but he thought he was pretty okay. But what he didn't understand was that he had this life-controlling anger that just sat under the surface. And it came out in him being easily grumpy, irritable, sort of unable to be flexible and almost protecting everything that he decided would happen and why it would happen. And it actually created two problems. It was something he was blind to, so he ignored it and saw no problems within himself. And the second thing was that it really impacted on his family. It affected how they did life together. And it wasn't till he was able to see that he has been angry for so long and that he is so much more emotional than he thought he was before any healing started to come to him and his family. But see, just being aware of your own stuff is only part of the journey. Emotional health actually means that you are able to see something in someone else. You can, you're able to understand, you're able to empathise with another person, and you can see their feelings, and in your response you actually are helpful and don't make it worse. In the story of Job in the Old Testament, Job's mates just made it worse. Everything they said just made it worse. And so emotional health is knowing who you are, understanding something of your own feelings, and actually even understanding your own needs, but being willing to even lay them aside just for a short time to meet the needs of someone else and to be a help to someone else, to be able to socially interact with people or within your own family. Now, there's about 7 basic emotions that are common to every person on planet Earth. But every culture sort of allows the expression of those in different ways. So in our Aussie culture, we have a thing in our Aussie culture where men in particular are allowed socially to stay very stunted emotionally. That we give men a very narrow expression of that unless it involves sport. But otherwise it's a very narrow expression of emotion. And we create stereotypes that says this is what men are like and this is what women are like. And we say that women are so much more emotional. It's just rubbish. But it's what we've established in our culture. And emotions serve incredibly important roles in our lives. And I found the Bible so helpful in helping me understand my own emotions, helping me understand other people's, because the Bible gives us a big picture of what emotional intelligence looks like, what an emotionally whole person looks like. Which I actually find, if that's true, which I think it is, I find it surprising that historically Christians have tended to push emotions down as not that important, that we walk by faith and not by sight, and we have tended to downplay the role of emotions. We don't trust them, which is actually the opposite to what Jesus did. Jesus embraced his emotions, and he took them as like a catalyst that motivated him to action. And I'm going to come back to that in a moment, but I just want to add a tiny bit of science to our discussion this morning. So there's a stretch for me. But emotional processing and reason are linked together in the brain. And it's impossible for a person to be reasonable and rational without emotions, because it's this frontal lobe, whatever that is, there's something at the front of your head, right? And so something in here, it's all connected. And the brain processes both reason and emotions together. They work in tandem. They cannot exist without each other. And reasoning and problem solving require intuition to distinguish what's important from what isn't. And intuition requires emotion. Peter, am I going okay? This makes sense to you? Learned counsellor, educated person? Yep. I love the way you just nod, like, don't embarrass me, just get on with it. Yes. Frontal cortex. It's not a swear word, it's okay. Yeah, right. Okay, so emotions are needed because they're God's compass in our life. And you can't have intuition without emotion helping you go that journey. So emotions can actually guide us, they can instruct, they can help us learn, they can help us change. But to get the most out of our emotions, we have to understand them and not suppress them. And as a parent, one of the greatest gifts you can give your kids is helping them to understand their emotions, because they're very intense in kids. We've got grandkids. I promise you they can be really, really, really intense. And so helping them navigate that, giving them the tools, that's one of the gifts you can give as a parent. Like, just think back to your own childhood, when you started manifesting emotions that were not seen as helpful, like anger or sadness or fear. How did your parents respond? How were you told to handle these things? We have a little granddaughter who's just turned 6. And I mentioned last week about her overwhelming fear of spiders. It's ridiculous. But do you know what? How I as a granddad respond in those moments, that determines how she sees herself, her worldview, how I handle those moments. And like this morning, I've got these little birds that I'm hand raising, and over the last few days, she's wanted to handle them, but she's scared of them. And so over the last few days, I've gradually got her holding them, and this morning, she said, "Granddad, can I put it back in its cage? How do I do that?" So I showed her how to do that. She put it back in. Now she thinks it's easy. But she ran to her dad and said, "Dad, do you know why she was telling her dad? Because I'd helped her through a process of fear that had control over her. And how we respond is just so critical to the reaction that people carry for the rest of their life." I want to say something this morning, and if you remember nothing else, this is why you came. I want to say this one thing, that emotions in another human being is an opportunity to connect. It doesn't matter if those emotions are off the Richter scale and wrong. It doesn't matter if the emotions are whole and balanced. Any emotion in another human being is our opportunity to connect with that person at that time. And how we respond is how the relationship goes, the depth of the relationship, the health of that relationship. Last week, if you were here or you watched this online, Phil and Lynn were sitting about here. And Phil and I had a little moment when no one else was in the room, or it didn't matter if other people were in the room. But I said some things to Phil, and Phil and I were looking at each other, and we felt something together that without emotion, that would not have happened. If it was just words with no emotion attached, it wouldn't have had the power that it had. Emotions are just so important. And Jesus used his emotions to launch him into how he responded to people. If you think back to, there's a story in the Bible where Jesus finds out that his cousin has just been murdered, had his head cut off. And his response to that was, "I'm done with this. I just want to get away from everything. I'm just done. Emotionally, I'm wrecked. I love my cousin, John. Let's just go to a quiet place. Let's get away from people. Let's just go." And when he got to this quiet place, the crowds followed him. And what happened in the narrative, as we hear the narrative, it says that when he saw them, he had compassion on them. He was aware of their needs, but when compassion hit him, he healed them. That's the day they fed this great big mob of people supernaturally, but it was compassion that moved him to not be focused on his own loss, but to focus on someone else. There's a story about Lazarus, and as John tells us a story about Lazarus, he begins by saying that Lazarus was someone that Jesus really loved. And they get this courier pigeon arrive, or a text message or an email, something arrived and told Jesus that the one he loved was sick. And then John, in telling us the story, makes us doubly sure we know that Jesus loved him. He says that Jesus loved Mary and Martha, and he loved Lazarus. And so, instead of rushing to help them, he stayed where he was for 2 days, which isn't what you'd expect from a loving God. And yet, then when they went to get there, he told the disciples with him, he said, "Look, Lazarus is sleeping, we're going to wake him up." And they're going, "Well, if he's sleeping, that's a good thing. He'll get healthy." And they just go, no, you don't get it. The boy's dead. He's dead, right? When they arrived, Mary came out to greet Jesus before he ever got to the place. And it says in John's account that when Mary was crying and all the mourners were with him crying, Jesus wept in response to that. And people watching go, oh, he must have loved them. He wasn't crying because he loved Lazarus. His response emotionally was to their emotional hurt. It was a connection point. He responded. He knew Lazarus was already dead. He's coming to do something about it. But in that moment of connection, something happened. And twice it describes that Jesus had another response. And it's totally emotional. And there's words that the Bible can't quite translate. It says that he groaned, that he was troubled in his spirit, and these words mean that he had a reflex reaction, and it was all emotional. And all the different translations try to come up with different words, but Jesus had an emotional reaction to that situation before Lazarus ever came out of that grave alive. It's the emotion that Jesus allowed. When he told a story of a guy that got bashed, and it's called the story of the Good Samaritan, but this guy gets bashed on the side of a road. And in the story Jesus is telling, he says that when this Good Samaritan guy sees him, had compassion on him. And so he went. It was the compassion, it was the emotional response that took him to go and do all the things that he did. It was action that was followed by emotion. When Jesus took a whip and cleared a temple and turned over tables, and he got really cranky, and he was cranky at the injustice and the moral wrongness that was taking place in the temple. The disciples tried to do it like Christians do it. They tried to explain it away with religious words. And so they took an Old Testament verse and they said that, Jesus did it because it was prophesied that zeal for your house will fill him up. Zeal. It's just a religious word for emotion, for passion, for something driving him to do what he did. When Jesus went to the cross, we know in the story that he said, not my will, but your will, God. And that he went to the cross with obedience. That's rational response to what God had called him to do. But the writer of Hebrews doesn't tell us that. The writer of Hebrews says that he went to the cross for the joy that was set before him. He endured the cross, not for the results, not for the outcome in people's lives, but for the joy, the emotion he would feel. Jesus went to the cross allowing his reason and his emotion to work in tandem. He allowed the joy ahead of him and the obedience that he was doing to work together. It's an opportunity in life when something's happened, an emotion grabs you, or you see the emotion in the other person. It's a moment to connect with them. And as a parent, this can be your finest hour when your kids are expressing a whole lot of emotion. And sometimes it's easy when you've got a little tacker and they're 18 months old and they fall over and they're crying and they're hurt and you comfort them. But when they're 18 years old or 15 years old and they do something, you'll say, that'll teach you. You'll learn now, won't you? You know? And so we have a different response. When my daughter was 7, she was getting bullied at school here in Bairnsdale, and it was really distressing to her. And she felt intimidated to go to school. She felt almost panicky about going to school. She felt isolated and alone from what was happening, what her friends were doing to her. And she came to me as a dad. And at the time, I'm the youth pastor here in Bairnsdale. She said, Dad, what do I do? And I said, well, smash him in the face. I didn't do the turn the other cheek bit. I just said punch him in the face. See, the outcome sometimes is not as important as the process. Because what did she hear? She heard that her dad would back her up if that emotionally she responded physically. She understood that her dad was telling her, you don't have to be someone that gets walked over. You can actually stand up. You've got within you enough to stand up against this situation, right? She felt her dad backing her up. And I'll tell you, my daughter Mandy is 37. Help me out, Coral. Right? But Mandy and I remember that moment. We'll never forget it because we connected at a level, because in that emotional moment, I went the right way. If you talk to my daughters, there's moments when I've gone the other way, and they can remember moments I didn't handle it well. But that, I did well. I did good on that one. As a husband, as a wife, when your partner is melting down, Coral, she worries about things that have no effect on me. And if I just ignore her in those moments, what does that tell her? My finest moments as a husband is when I've taken that emotional response in her and responded well. We haven't got a scorecard. We don't keep score on that one, do we, Coral? No. But sometimes I get it right, don't I? Yes. And when your friends have moments emotionally, how you respond, that's where the friendship goes. How with total strangers. When we were running a large high school program in the Bairnsdale Secondary College, there was a cleaner there. And he used to clean up after our mess, which is why I got to know him. And so we were doing a big thing in the Bark Auditorium there, and he'd come and clean up our mess, and so we became to sort of know each other. And I remember one day standing in the front entrance of the Bark, and he said to me, Lex, my mum's just died. I just found out my mum's died. And I'm standing there next to this sort of person I knew. And I can remember saying to him, can I pray for you? And we'd never had a God conversation ever. He said to me, I would love that. I'd appreciate that. And I remember standing in the entrance, and I sort of just put a hand on his shoulder and I just prayed for him. He started bawling his eyes out, and he just hugged me and wouldn't let go in the foyer of the Bark. I can't even remember his name. But every time we saw each other after that, how you going, mate? How you going? It's because something happened. There was a connection. In that moment, something put us together like this. And we were coming back from Hillsong conference years ago, and I'm flogging along through the dark. It's 2 o'clock in the morning, somewhere between Cairn River and Bairnsdale, and Coral's looking worried. And suddenly this four-wheel drive parked on the other side of the road, put all these little lights on, and came to visit us and have a talk to us. And I think it was because the Speedo was saying more than it should be, right? And so this cop pulls up behind me, and we get out, and it's cold, it's middle of winter, and he says, that's going to be $400 and something, and he's writing it out, and then he looked at me and says, I can't do this. I'm in the wrong job. You don't deserve that. He just ripped it up. And I teared up, and I hugged him. At 2 a.m, I'm hugging this big cop, and he's hugging me, and we're having a moment. How many of you have hugged a cop recently? It's a good thing to do. Sarah, put your hand down. We don't want to know, right? Don't want to know. No details, right? No details. But it was a moment when emotion grabbed him. He wasn't just going logic. He wasn't thinking, this is my job, you're a baddie, I'm the goodie, you're done. His emotion kicked in, and he made a different decision. And so my emotions kicked in, and I hugged him when I wasn't wanting to hug him when he first pulled us up, you know. And so you'll find all through the Bible, emotion-driven responses. If you look at the Psalms, David turns up to God misery guts. He's just, I hate the world, I'll go and eat worms. He's really upset with God, with life, and then somewhere through the psalm, he finds God again, and life's wonderful. But if he didn't allow his emotions to take him on a journey, he wouldn't have got where he was going. And throughout my life, I have had a life-controlling problem with anger. For those that knew me in my younger days, I spoilt many, many moments if we were playing cards and I was losing. If we were out spotlighting and someone missed a fox, a lousy shot, I would get out and blast them and pack up and go home. Jeff has experienced the damage that my anger has caused. But I'm telling you, anger no longer has a control on my life. And next week, I want us to look at anger as just one emotion. Because Paul says something really strange. He says, be angry and sin not. There is a place for anger. There's a place where anger takes us to places we shouldn't go, but there is a place for anger. And so I'm going to focus next week on just anger. So I'm finishing now, but I want to also let you know that next week we've got the Coolmatong interns are all coming. And we're going to have a full house next week. We're going to have them doing some items. We're going to do some interviews with them. But I'm going to be speaking on anger. And it's just really great to have you back. I know this series keeps dragging on, but I want us to get something out of it. And I'm amazed at those that watch this online and then contact me. And someone whose life I physically saved in a car accident, she contacted me this week after watching this from last week. And she said to me, Lex, for the first time in 9 years, I'm starting to get what you're talking about, this God stuff. And it's encouraging. And I know for some of you, the personal journeys of your life, where you are at the moment. And I just thank you for the honesty of people in this room and outside of it. And we're going to get to go somewhere together. We're going to see freedom come. Okay, I've just got a thing here. Prayer request. Is that my Laurie? We're 2 days apart in age, and growing up he was my best mate. And I've just got a text message saying that he's got prostate cancer and bone cancer in the pelvis. Would love your prayers. He starts at Peter Mac on the 22nd of February in Bendigo. Lord, I thank you for Laurie's life. I thank you for the role that he's played in my life as my best mate, growing up as a teenager. And right now, in the authority that you have given us as your kids, you slapped a badge on us, you deputised us, and you said that we could pray for those who are sick and they would recover. And in the authority that you have given us, I speak your healing over Laurie, against all logic, against reason. I just allow the emotion of the moment to take me to a place where I'd be bold enough to pray your healing against bone cancer and against prostate cancer in your name, in your authority. And together, there is so much power when we agree together. And Lord, this is what you've called us to do, to make a difference in real lives, in real ways. And I speak your healing over him right now, Lord. May Jeanette know your comfort and your peace in a way that goes way beyond any understanding. That Dave, his brother, who's been watching every week for 10 months in Adelaide, Redgum Live, Dave, we're with you, mate. We're with you. Barry, you've walked through this. Prostate cancer. We've prayed for you. God's healed you. And so, Dave, I'm telling you, we're with you as a family. For Jeff Pearce, love you, mate. Yeah. It's such an awesome thing to bring people that we know, that we love before God and see God do stuff that we can't do. It's such an amazing thing to do. And I'm telling you, I could not do this stuff with church if it wasn't seeing what God does in people's lives in response to simple little throwaway prayers that we feel so inadequate to pray at times. Yep. So, on that happy note, you guys want to sing a song?
Yeah, sure.
And if anyone wants prayer for anything, any week, you don't have to ask. We don't have to have official whatevers. Just say, can someone pray with me? Don't walk out of here the same, you know. Yeah.